Hi guys, so I thought I'd have a look at something a little bit more subtle this week. It's how I use my fingerstyle technique when I'm playing legato lines. Now there's a few things going on here that you probably miss if you just watched me play, because there's kinds of a few really subtle things going on. The guitar this week has distortion, as you can hear. And the reason for that is distortion really shows if you haven't got control of the strings. You know, all of this extraneous noise really starts to sound out. But this is a technique that can be used on any type of guitar, even the acoustic guitar, because you're actually hitting the strings quite hard with your right hand when you're using these kinds of techniques. The pattern I'm going to use is ascending and descending groups of 4. You can use this with any kind of line that you're playing. You'll find that as you develop this, you'll be fluent with it and you won't actually realise that you're doing it anymore. It just becomes an unconscious habit. The nice thing about ascending and descending 4s is, one, hopefully you're already aware of them and you have some ability to play them with your left hand. And two, they involve quite a lot of switching between strings as well, which is something that you've really got to work on when you're playing legato. So the legato line techniques that I'm using is the more traditional approach, where the right hand plays the string, and then when you change the string, the right hand gets involved and plays the line, starts the line on the next string as well, as opposed to the Brett Garsed technique of hammers on all the time, which I've covered in other videos. So if you're not aware of the hammer on only technique, then maybe you want to check one of those videos out. I'll put a link up there as well. Anyway, enough talking, let's drill in and see if I can demonstrate what I'm up to. Okay, before I start playing the pattern, I just want to remind you that there are really two types of way of plucking a string if you're playing fingerstyle. There's what's called free stroke or tarando, which is where you play the string and your finger comes away from the string. Yeah, it just plays the string. And if you contrast that with something called a rest stroke or appiando, and when you do that, what you do is you play the string, but you fall onto the string below. So my finger is actually resting on the B string, plays the E string, rests on the B string. Hence the name rest stroke. And throughout this, from this point forward, all we're going to be doing is using rest strokes or appiando strokes. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. Firstly, they're a good strong movement, so even if you're playing on the acoustic guitar, they're going to make a good big sound. And the other reason is that because they fall onto the string below, they actually mute the string below, so they're really useful for string control. Okay, so that's the rest stroke technique. The other thing to be aware of is what I call a rake, which is where I play a note with my finger, and then as my finger's fallen onto the string below, I can play that next string with the same finger as well. So my finger is just raking across the strings, just by virtue of the fact that I'm using this appiando technique. So it's setting me up for the next string down, as you can see. So let's see how this applies to this descending 4s pattern. So we're just going to be going. So that's the pattern we're going to be using, but it'll work across any kind of pattern. So let's have a look really closely at what's going on with my left hand when I'm doing this. So I start the string vibrating with my index finger with this appiando stroke. And so that means that because of the position of my left hand, you can see that my thumb is actually muting pretty much all of the strings below. And my index finger has just fallen onto the B string. So the only string that can possibly ring is the E string. Yeah? So that's the first 4 notes. And because my finger's fallen onto that B string, I can rake through and play that. So that gives my first four notes. Yeah? The other thing to be aware of is what my left hand is doing. Now my left hand is a little bit flatter. And the reason for that is that it naturally then mutes the strings above the note that you're playing. So that transition from that B to that D note, I'm playing the E note with my index finger, and when I put my little finger down, it's actually muting the E string. Can you hear that? Yeah. And of course, my index finger has fallen from the B string down to the G string. So now, the only string that can play on the guitar at all is that B string. Every other string is controlled through a combination of my left hand being a little bit flatter, so it's controlling the strings above, and the fact that I'm using this appiando stroke, which automatically falls on the string below. And you see that here, specifically when I start the next group of 4, I'll start that with my middle finger. And again, I'm using that appiando stroke. Can you see that? And by starting it with my middle finger and using that appiando, it's killed that B string sound. Okay? And now I pull off and I do that rake. And then I start the next line with my index finger. So that note's ringing, but my index finger does that appiando stroke and that kills the B string. You see how? Do you hear? By just using a combination of a little bit of flatness on this hand to control the strings above and these appiando strokes, I've got control of all of the strings at all times. And you can do exactly the same thing coming up the other way. So let's start on the low E. So again, we're starting with an index finger stroke. And then that first note on the A string is played with my middle finger, but it's played with that rest stroke. So it's killing the E string. And then I rake through. Play that A note again and killing that E string. So hopefully you can see how it's a very economic movement as well. Each finger's doing a number of things. It's both controlling the strings around it and it's playing the note as well. And that's what makes this a really powerful technique. So you can get up to some really fast speeds if you do this. So like I say, this is a general purpose technique. It's not just applicable to ascending and descending fours. I use this all the time when I'm playing legato. And it's also the kind of thing that once you develop the habit, once you develop the skill, the techniques, it's like running. You don't think about how your legs are moving when you're running. They just do it. And similarly, you don't think about these techniques. You don't think about rest strokes. You don't think about rakes across the string. Once you have the techniques under your fingers, they just become an unconscious habit and you focus on the notes. So it's a really useful technique, so it's a really useful general purpose set of techniques for playing legato lines. So I'd really recommend you giving this a go. Anyway, let's chat next time. Goodbye.